guest, and as you've seen there, Dr. Tunde joins us now. He's a fellow, Association of Nigerian Authors. He's also former special assistant to the president. Good morning. Thank you for coming on today.
Good morning, Chamberlain. Good morning, Markway.
Quite a number of things playing out in the polity, and perhaps maybe you might want to start with that. I mean, you were in the corridors at some point, and so you have an understanding. In fact, the president too was the Minister of Health at the time. I mean, the Minister of Petroleum. So what was the thinking behind that in the first place?
Well, thank you very much for having me again. Because petroleum is almost a singular product which drives our economy. When President Obasanjo came in 1999, he thought that this should be supervised directly by him. I can't remember that we even had a Minister of State under Obasanjo. We had a special advisor in Dr. Rilwan Lukman. So through and through, the administration of the petroleum sector was driven by the president. But again, he gave quite some latitude to the people who were handling a brief on his behalf. We had Rilwan Lukman, we had Gayos Obaseki, we also had Engineer Funsho Ugbolokun, who was an assistant to the president, reporting to the president on petroleum. So, you know, in a manner of speaking, we probably want to talk about the fact that there were enough eyes overseeing that sector.
There was a team.
There was a team, you know, and yeah, I think they were fairly effective. And as the administration grew, I think Obasanjo actually even let go in a bit. Dr. Dakoru, you know, at some point was advisor, and I think that was when even the issue of the recalibration of the office into Minister of State began. You know, so that's what.
So when they say that if you talk about the ministry and if the president was a substantive minister, so you will look as if you're attacking him. Is that how the presidents think, if people talk about that?
Yeah, you know, I mean, it depends on the tolerance level of whoever is in charge. But I think, you know, the former emir in this instance was probably talking about, you know, how very insular, you know, the previous regime was. And, you know, how unadvisable they were. Because, you know, information was probably not even getting to them. The correspondence route under a president like Obasanjo was very direct. There were very few interlopers who could keep aside your memo from getting to the president. And give it to him. He was also a very energetic person. He read his memos and his correspondences wherever he was going. Anything that would take him away from his office for 5-6 hours by way of a trip, for instance, he had his folio there with him, looking at documents. So, but unfortunately, in subsequent dispensations, the last advert we listened to was saying, you know, talked about the absence of a petroleum minister vis-a-vis when he was CBN, when there was a minister in Desiani Alison Madweke. Again, I'm not holding brief for the last administration or for the continuation of that tradition in the present milieu. But we probably have witnessed in the last 8-9 years now that again, the ministry has reverted to direct supervision under the president through the Minister of State.
Do you think that, pardon me jumping, do you think this president should actually not be the Minister of Petroleum?
It doesn't have to be. I think there are enough hands in this country to help out. We just have to put somebody there who knows his onions. You don't have to be a petroleum engineer or whatever, but you know, there has to be somebody accountable to us. Because like you said, if you have any issues now and you want to criticize happenings in that ministry, they're going to be misconstrued, you know, in a kind of, you know, policy where people are unnecessarily edgy and touchy, you know, about issues.
But this president has said time and again, look, we asked for this job. We welcome criticisms. They will come. So can we then say that he'll be touchy?
He might not be touchy, but don't forget that there's always a chain, you know, of aides around the president. So there are people who actually make these imputations, usually on his behalf. You know, but like I said, I mean, if he has the stamina for paperwork, he should be able to gloss over things like this. But again, like I said, there are bus stops. So you don't know how these people are going to interpret these issues before they get to him. The president is one individual. He is not a Superman ordinarily. So there will be people too, like I said, officers, state officials who are at various bus stops on route decisions and implementation.
Well, I know that the jury is to be out as to whether or not the president should be minister or not. Yeah. But, we've obviously tried both experiences, and I don't think the Nigerians have been satisfied with the outcome of any one of them. And when we had the minister for Petroleum Resources, we also saw that didn't quite end well. And even now, she's still wanted by either the EFCC or answering cases in the United Kingdom, where she's currently resident. And even right here, when we had you mentioned Olusegun Obasanjo, I'm sure a lot of people will not remember that era very clearly. But we have one which you remember for 8 years. And, there were questions as to how the resources were managed. Even right now, you heard the former CBN governor there asking questions about where the dollars are at.
I think it is also about, opacity in, the administration of state funds. People keep reminding us that the number of barrels that we put out there by way of saying we produce every day would be more, because we don't have a metering system at the point, of sale. And we've also had to, in instances where even the pipeline has been interfered with, trespassed at various junctions and intersections, where people actually take this directly to serve their own, private and indigenous mini refineries, as it were. So, it's a whole web around it. And, coming back to what we're saying, unfortunately, maybe because of the way, the thing went between 2010 and 2015, President Muhammadu Buhari probably believed in his own wisdom. It was better to revert the office to him. Unfortunately, too, there would have been lapses because, he probably was not a handsome person like Obasanjo.
But I think for me, you've hit the nail on the head in terms of opacity. What people have asked for is more transparency and accountability on the part of the NNPC and in general, the Ministry of Petroleum Resources. We've now seen 2 ministers of state appointed in that sector, one to look at gas and the other to actually look at the ministry itself. With respect to opacity, do you think that we're getting more transparency? Yes, the NNPC says, oh, now we audit our books and they're there for anybody to see. But it doesn't look like we're still satisfied about the level of accountability that we're getting from Nigeria's oil.
Absolutely. In fact, oil is just one of the things we're not getting enough information or data from. Government also gets resources from other sectors. Can we, for instance, be very sure that it is the X trillions of naira that an organization like the Federal Inland Revenue Service actually gets in for us? Is this correct to the last million or the last couple? Can we say the same thing about the collection system with the Nigerian Customs Service? So there are, it's a myriad of issues that come in. Petroleum is major, but we shouldn't forget these other ones too. So, what we are calling there for, what we should be calling on there for, is, for across-board transparency in the business of governance. It's very important.
And speaking about that, what is your impression about how this government is trudging on so far?
It's been, the journey, in many instances has been characterized by fits and starts. The president at some point told us, for instance, that the removal of oil subsidy was not in his speech on March 29, 2023. And he told us that, something like a spirit of courage possessed him at that point. And he spoke extempore, removing the subsidy. We've been hearing in recent weeks and months that government might have actually reverted to subtle subsidy may be under the table somehow. The other day, we talked about asking universities to revert 40% of their earnings to the federal government. And then we buckle again, we recant. Oh, don't worry, we don't want to disrupt the system. So we go forward again on the issue of students' loan. And, I hope it eventually develops a framework. But right now, it just seems like stuff in the air. So, we can go on and go. Too many, knee-jerks, too many, backs and fronts and all that. Maybe we want to just put it to the relative youthfulness of the team in terms of, calendrical, numbers now, 6-7 months. But Nigerians actually deserve a lot more, especially for a government that says from Eagle Square, we are going to hit the ground running.
Yeah. Two things, Doctor. First, is that a sign, is it a good sign or what? Because some say, well, they interpret that as such that, well, they're listening to the people. So some think, yeah, well, not a good sign, but others think otherwise. How do we relate to that?
Well, you might be listening to the people, but what blueprints did you also bring to the fore? So what are you acting on? What are you, addressing your mind to? You probably came with A, B, C, D, and did you work it out? Did you do a SWOT analysis? Did you open it up for a dissection so that you know that, well, if we do this, we have to do that? Government said they were removing subsidy, but there are no palliatives. We're just talking about CNG buses now and all that, which we haven't started seeing.
But about that subsidy, it was already in the law. So is it that maybe because he spoke about it then, it brought a lot more attention. The previous government just didn't implement it. So it was already there. So were we actually going to be up in arms against it? Because if we were, shouldn't we have done something as a country when they said, look, it's already in the laws here. So if they meant to, why didn't they just say, look, remove it from the laws? So they left it for whoever was going to come in.
I don't know whether it was in the laws, but it probably had been proposed.
In the Act, Petroleum Industry Act.
Okay, fine, But, just like I said, the waiting period, the gestation period between when you win an election and when you come provides you some window, for reflection. We wouldn't have known what Mr. President's advisors, told him about this, which informed his position. We give credit to the president. In some instance, there are good technocrats in places. So let's hope that he's availing himself of the deep wisdom of his people.
But when you were in government, did government always get the picture about what the people are really facing? Because there's a school of thought that says, look, they are insulated from the reality. They go in all those convoys, they have all the privileges.
We did in my time.
Okay.
Very much so, because Obasanjo started out with something that was supposed to be a grooming process for future leadership. So you had a situation where for every every brief level of a minister, there was an assistant or an advisor. I, for instance, added, sports oversight to my own work. So wherever the president couldn't go in the world, the minister went and I went. And I had a more direct line to the president. So I could call the State House and I speak to Mr. President. Kanu Nwankwo is here with me. Okota is here, Mr. President, they want to say hello to you. This was the Obasanjo era. Now, there was no discrimination about this memo is not coming from a minister or something like that. Obasanjo wanted to read everything. And Obasanjo picks his call after the first 2 rings. He didn't outsource things like this. He wants to be the first person to hear. If Obasanjo needs to cross-check what you're telling him, very direct person, unfortunately can occasionally embarrass you. When you're telling them, Mr. President, this is what is going on. He tells them, call me this person now. Put it on speaker. Minister, my boy, Tunde Lusule is here. He said this. Obasanjo did all of that. So there was a way we could now tell him back. When the toll gates were cancelled under his dispensation, when they were removed, I was traveling in the southeast, and I saw vehicles at night running into the toll gates that had not been removed. Accidents there. And I came back and I told him, and I called Ogunlewe, who was the minister there. So, I can give you examples. Wherever we went, there was always an interaction with the locals. Obasanjo also faithfully obliged his presidential media chat once every month, if you remember. It was an opportunity to sit with the media for 2 hours every month and tell Nigerians through them what. And of course, it was also phoning. So irrespective of where you are, you could call.
Well, I know that the jury will still be out on how that era was perceived, but let's quickly go to Lagos now because my colleagues are waiting.
Maupa, you made a very important point. I think the jury is actually watching right now and just trying to connect the dots, because it's very interesting how history works, right? You worked with former President Olusegun Obasanjo. His vice then was Atiku Abubakar. And now, how many years after, it looks like the governor that people said was a thorn in the flesh of former President Olusegun Obasanjo, the governor of Lagos at that time, now is the president. I know the former president had spoken about, the perceived rift between them, but former Vice President Atiku Abubakar, and I'd like to just get your thoughts on this. Recently at a World Press Conference, spoke about how he stopped or persuaded then President Olusegun Obasanjo from taking over, Lagos and the rest. Is that an accurate account of what really transpired? Was former Governor Bola Tinubu, now President of Nigeria, was he really a thorn in the flesh of former President Olusegun Obasanjo?
Well, we had a president who, in instances, because of his military background, detested being confronted, so to say. And, we also came from the background of zero state wins in the Southwest and the election which brought in Obasanjo. So, I imagine that he conceived his eventual coming on board as an opportunity to expand his scope and actually demonstrate to all of us that he has reach in his own home base, the Southwest. The internal politics of which state was taken and which was not, some of us might not have been privy to. At some level too, they also say that you are supposed to be seen and not to be heard.
Right. Again, I know that this is something that a lot of people will be looking to at least get some insight into, particularly because now we're still sort of reliving the past. But let's speak to this current government now. And you have worked in the presidency, again, for, 8 years? If they were to ask that infamous question, who is the presidency, perhaps you'd be one of the people to raise your hands and say, yes, I'm part of the presidency. People have described former President Olusegun Obasanjo as hands-on, and I think while describing former President Buhari, you said, well, it wasn't quite hands-on, especially with the Ministry of Petroleum that he was the minister of. So far, how would you describe this current president? You said there have been, flips and flops, knee-jerk here and there. Would you describe him as hands-on? Would you describe him as more of an intellectual person, more of a delegating kind of president? What is your own take on the president's style of governance?
I think he's more of a delegating person.
Is that a good thing?
Last year, even before the election, remember when he went to Chatham House, for his session with them there, and he had his personal aides and friends at the time, and as the questions came, you remember he actually was, pinpointing people who were to speak to the issues. Wali Adun could talk to this, Nasir El-Rufai could speak to that. So, of course, he comes like a delegating president. The issues in Nigeria, as we speak, are tougher. They are more challenging. The general has to also be in the face of fire. That is very important.
Well, since we're taking a walk down memory lane, sir, I'd like you to, with the benefit of hindsight, because you referred earlier to, how you had to intervene in a particular incident where you had to call former Minister of Works, Mr. Adishe Ogunlewe. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, how do you view the work ethic in ministries, departments, and agencies under this current administration, particularly, as time has worn on, with the growth that's debatable of our democracy, particularly because in recent times, the CBN governor had to refer to how germane the work ethic of ministries would be to the implementation of the current Appropriation Act, referring particularly to that, the need for the defeat of that, laissez-faire attitude to work, to the work process in Nigerian ministries. So how do you view the progress or lack of it from the time that you worked in the presidency and now?
Sorry about
So has
that.
there been any transition? Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Well, first and foremost, let me observe that the bureaucracy that we have right now at the level of the Federal Executive Council is indeed large. We have 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory, which is 37. But as we speak, we probably have about 48 ministers. So we have a more voluminous federal cabinet. This is going to impact on remunerations, on cost of governance, and issues like this. That's at that level. Indeed, you come below, a level of advisors and assistants, so much to say about that. I think previous administrations were a bit more thrifty. We are just 7 months here, so we don't really know what is going to happen moving forward. But Obasanjo, for instance, was very, very thrifty. He didn't accommodate for that kind of voluptuous, multi-level staffing list for administration. We are all crying, we are all bemoaning this, and at the same time, you also find our Lagbo style appearances, on the federal scene, and the national global scene, from New York during the UN Assembly where we went there and took over, New York. Nigerians were in all the hotels there in Manhattan and all that. Until more recently, the Dubai trip where Nigerian names overshot the 1,000 mark. The Minister of Information tried to make it light when he said that only about 400 and something people were sponsored by government. That itself was large. Kenya was represented by just about 50, 60 people. I make this point so that we can differentiate between, talking about what it was and what it is. President Obasanjo wanted to see the travel list. He made amendments, those he wanted to drop, those he wanted to add in many instances, so you had that kind of dynamism under his watch. We don't really know where we are going with this, but let's just express the optimism, that things will get better.
That's a really, I don't want to say honest mirror, but that's a good enough mirror to look into and see how things are. But let's quickly touch on security now. The NSA had cause to say recently, give a review about security, and he talked about a reduction in loss of lives and safety on a number of roads. But what really would be, in your opinion, the honest yardstick, a more objective, rather, yardstick to view the administration in terms of security in the last nearly 6 months now?
I guess, things, again, I don't really know whether 6 months is enough time, but if you want to speak, for instance, from the, background of the unfortunate incident of about a week ago, where innocent villagers, over 100 of them, were killed in error in a drone bombing, you probably want to say, wow, we're really getting it right. But the last time I traveled to my state for the off-season, off-cycle governorship election. I made the point that if the kind of security net I saw all through my state, going and coming back, if it was implemented all the time, people like me would probably want to go home more frequently. I don't know how it obtains elsewhere, but we read newspapers by the day, information gets to us, and things are, for me, they are not really getting better. I saw, on the news bar just a while ago, how was it 4 soldiers or 4 policemen were once again shot by unknown gunmen. We shouldn't pass this off at all. It means that we still have, issues to contend with. The administration still has, work to do in its evolution.
Well, that is remains very true. Only recently, just today, we read in the papers that the natives, the people of Igabi local government, Tinubu village, who were bombed in their numbers, have now sued the federal government for 33 billion naira. That certainly is a steep amount, but certainly, it also points to the responsibility that the state has towards them. How would you advise the federal government to resolve this matter?
Well, maybe I should give credit first to the military. They were upfront. They apologized from the level of the Chief of Defense Staff to the Chief of Army Staff, who has visited. The Vice President has been there. Very sad. None of us will wish for that for people of our communities. At some point, though, there will still have to be dialogue between the aggrieved, and their aggressors. And government also has to rethink its own security strategies so that it just don't go blind bumping people, the affected communities would have to be compensated, to see how the situation can be mitigated. There were instances where whole families were wiped out. How do we address that? It is for government now to begin to think about that beyond even the suit that has been instituted by the people. But again, government should not insult the people by carrying pillar loads of Indomie there, as if those are the only things that these people need to be placated with. Houses have to be built for them in instances. Scholarships have to be awarded. These are the kind of things I think government should be thinking about in addressing that.
All right. One wonders, would they then go back and revisit all those other previous matters, people who were displaced from their homes, who were killed, their places occupied? So several memories, and you just wonder. But I guess we'll wait and see how they proceed with all of this. But always a pleasure to have you on, Dr. Tunde Olusunde, Fellow, Association of Nigerian Authors, and also former Special Assistant to the President between 1999 and 2007.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Let's take a look at some messages here just before we go. This is from Henry. He says, I congratulate the leadership at all levels and the Nigerian people on the initiative signed yesterday. Aside the razzmatazz of ceremony, the big task is walking the talk. The elephant in the room is the subnationals. As at today, many states are not paying their counterpart funding for the Basic Healthcare Provision Fund for actualizing the minimum basic healthcare package for all Nigerians as enshrined in Section 11 of the National Health Act. There is no compelling instrument to enforce the provisions of any law, treaty, or compact. May this be a departure from the past, he says.
We say amen to that. Well, there's another email now, and this is from Dixon Eka, and he says, we do not have a health insurance in Nigeria right now, as the National Health Insurance Scheme has not covered up to 3% of Nigerians. The amount of money intending organizations are made to pay for their staff is just too much, and many people, after intending to register their staff, turn back because of the amount involved. Yeah. President Tinubu should do a comprehensive overhaul of the health insurance for Nigerians to make it affordable for many Nigerians. It says health is wealth.
Well, Sim's health is at the heart of the matter from our meals this morning. This one is from Olagunju Oladele. He says, looking at the Nigerian health system and how the government and private sector seem not to perceive an immediate threat, most people do not fear or value things they can't see, whereas many health conditions lack visible symptoms leading to a sense of detachment. Education and awareness campaigns can help bridge this gap with emphasis on the importance of a world-class health system, because you can't develop or grow an economy from sick people.
And from X, Festus Akimboyewa says the health sector renewal investment initiative may have come too late, as many professionals in our health sector have left to work abroad. But it's better late than never. FG and all stakeholders must first address the burnout and dissatisfaction in our healthcare service. No health system can function well without well-paid and well-motivated professionals.
Well, couldn't put it any better. Well, that is the show today. We do thank you all for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow. I'm Chamberlain, so goodbye. Thank you. I'm Malpe Ogun Yusuf. Bye for now.
And do have yourselves a wonderful day ahead. I am Bukola Koka.
I'm Kayode Kikilu. Goodbye.